Brad for the music tonight, and I just wanted to let you know a little more about it. I think there's going to be an amazing session, 5 p.m. 3G, the heartbeat of a generation. How a family made the world sway to their percussive genius. A conversation between Grammy Award winner Vikku Vinayakram, his son Shelva Ganesh, and his grandson Swaminathan. It will be an amazing session for sure. And it will be followed by the wonderful Nurani sisters. And then it'll be time to let loose with Indian Ocean, possibly India's most legendary independent band. So before we start the session, just a quick note, please turn off your cell phones or set them on silent mode. We do not want any interruptions. And actually, without further ado, I'm going to welcome our authors on stage. The session is called Migrant Words. Amitava Kumar, Nikesh Shukla in conversation with Amrita Tripathi, presented by
दैनिक
Bhaskar.
भास्कर राजस्थान का सबसे बड़ा अखबार दैनिक भास्कर एक स्मार्ट सोच
There we go. And the authors will be signing
दैनिक
books afterwards just up the
भास्कर
stairs.
राजस्थान का सबसे बड़ा अखबार दैनिक भास्कर एक स्मार्ट सोच
Literally got my security blanket. If you guys need a security blanket, it's on my lap. You may have it. Thank you, everyone, for being here for this session. We're very excited and privileged to be here in conversation with Amitava Kumar and Nikesh Shukla. I'm going to ask, just with a rough show of hands, how many of you have read them so that we don't... Okay, a few. There we go. See? That's always a good way to start.
Let's applaud that.
Yes. We're applauding you. And we'll definitely make this as interactive as possible, breaking for questions. So do, raise your hand if you have a question. Feel free to jump in towards the end of this conversation. I want to start by asking both Nikesh, who has just reached India and is in acclimatizing quickly as we speak, and Amitava to read a small extra section from your books so we can set the stage. Nikesh, you go first.
Okay. Hey. Hello, everyone. All right? Cool. So I'm going to read from my latest novel, The One Who Wrote Destiny, which is it's like a intergenerational family saga set around the four members of the Jani family. And it's about migration and race and cancer and stand-up comedy. And I'm going to read from the middle of the book, quite helpfully, where the father of the family goes to visit his son doing stand-up for the first time. Yeah. As you can tell, I have been traveling for about 27 hours to be here. I will quicken up the pace of my talking starting now. I watch my son take selfies with fans and sign his DVDs, and I feel proud that he is doing what he was always meant to do. He eventually walks towards me. As he does, three people congratulate him on a brilliant show. "What did you think, Dad?" he says. "A show about a donkey." "It's a show about Neha," Rakesh says. "I wanted her to live forever." "It did not have many jokes," I tell him. I did not mean to offer this criticism. I could hear people laughing all the way through, chuckling, big laughs here and there, but I did not find any of it funny. It was all the truth. It was all about us. There is nothing funny about us. "I didn't expect you to laugh, Dad," Rakesh chuckles. A show called Little Vijay all about the time you abandoned your children with a stranger in the middle of Mombasa. It doesn't exactly paint you as Father of the Year. "Stranger," I remind him, "that's your bar you're talking about. She's family, not a stranger. You're very sentimental." Two more people approach Rakesh and tell him they love the show, interrupting me. One says it made her cry. "Should we go somewhere else?" I say, interrupting their conversation. "Sorry," Rakesh says to the people he's talking to. "This is my dad." "Your son's fucking funny, mate," one man says to me. His girlfriend nods. "So fucking funny, mate." "Thank you," I say. "I taught him everything he knows." And they then go on to another show. This show is different from the earlier one. This time the comedians who are drunk come up to do 5 minutes of material about the politics of the day. We're in a pub. The stage area has been dressed in a big black curtain. A man is talking about the Prime Minister and people are booing. There is chatter from the back of the pub. Rakesh is sitting next to me, shaking his right leg furiously. I put my hand on his knee to steady it. He must be nervous. When his name is announced, he bounds onto stage. His energy on stage is that of someone who has just been electrocuted and has 5 minutes of intensity before falling over. He is someone I have not met before. Colonialism, he says. What's up with that? People laugh. I smirk. Colonialism was silly. Thanks for the railways. I always have to say thanks for the railways, it seems. 40% of this country said colonialism was a good thing. 40%, I don't understand it. That's a lot of people who think that the systemic rape, pillage and resource mining of countries across the world, enslaving generations, forcing them to be Christian, and then when some countries fight back, giving them the illusion of democracy and dividing the people, is a good thing. A positive thing. Well done, the Brits. Wasn't colonialism great? It was shit. I know it was shit. My dad knows it was shit. He grew up during the British Empire. Did you know that? And he thought it was shit. And the 40% of you thought colonialism was a good thing. If you'd been alive at the time, it wouldn't have been like Downton Abbey for the majority of you. No, you feudal serfs have all been dead of scurvy. How's that for white privilege? Everyone wants to go back to the good old days, because no matter how shit their place in society would have been, at least they would have owned some colours. Am I right, ladies and gentlemen? Colonialism. What's up with that? Go back where you came from then. The audience gasps. I look around me, angry. How dare they interrupt my son? Go back to where he came from. My bloody son is from Harrow. Rakesh freezes. He looks out into the crowd, a hand on his hip, and he sighs. He doesn't know what to say. The audience is waiting for his response. He has none. I stand up, trembling. Who said that? I shout to the crowd. Yup, Rakesh says. I brought my dad. And he's going to beat up the dad of whoever said that. So good night and always punch a Nazi and see you in the car park. I'm bringing my dad. The entire audience bursts into laughter. They clap. Some stand up. People pat me on the shoulder. Rakesh jumps off stage. Let's go, he whispers. Why, I say. Because I just challenged someone to a fight. I want to go in case they actually accept. Thanks.
Love it. Also how, the father goes on to be this sort of Twitter sensation, and Rakesh is like, that's just great, like his father starts trending thanks to this. But I think a lot of Indians would, what resonates is when he's like, that's not funny, our family is not funny, why is this a joke? So we'll talk a little bit about the intergenerational play there. Amitava, do you want to read a section and then we'll come back to...
How are you guys doing? All right? I see Hari Kunjuru in the audience. The last time Amrita spoke to Hari and I, the police arrived 45 minutes later and we had to leave this festival. So it's a good reunion. Wonderful.
Bring a camera crew this time.
Kya, 6 saal pehle tha? 7 years ago? I can't remember now. Hari had to shift his engagement to Thailand or something.
Oh, God.
Never been there before. That's about migrant stories. You know what I'm saying? You have to migrate overnight because you have done something at JLF that has the police coming for you.
And we won't be taking questions on that. Thanks,
Yeah,
Amitava.
excellent. All right. But Amrita was involved in it because she interviewed us outside. Do you remember that? Yeah. So when she says Twitter, it was, his dad was trending on Twitter. That's what we were doing that night. Okay. I'm going to read from my novel, a small section. Amrita pointed out that it's the American dream to go to, it's the Indian dream to go to America, so here's the real deal, all right? I became a US citizen last year. The ceremony was held at noon on a Saturday in the high school in a town nearby. A table was set with 20 miniature American flags on it and a stack of certificates. The ceremony got underway with 3 pudgy Boy Scouts bringing onto the stage a large US flag. They held their fingers up in a salute, hands close to their temples as if they were in pain. We were informed that together we represented citizens of Somalia, Mexico, El Salvador, Jamaica, and India. The Somalis were one large family dressed in shiny clothes. The judge, a man of Filipino origin, asked us to repeat the oath. Like everyone else, I held my right hand up. Once that was done, the judge said, "Congratulations, you're now citizens of the United States. You have forsaken the country of your birth in exchange for the rights and privileges of this country." He repeated the word privilege, saying, You're not entitled to be in the United States. Instead, it is a privilege. There is no better country in the world. But I only felt like a man without a country, and tears came to my eyes. I was crying, perhaps only because the judge, in a poor, inaccurate choice of words, had used the word forsaken. The man next to me, a native of Guadalajara, thought these were tears of happiness and began to congratulate me. The judge said that he was now going to ask a man who embodied the American experience and was a hero to speak to us for a few minutes. A large black man with bad knees climbed onto the stage. He had played for the Denver Broncos in the 1999 Super Bowl. I don't remember his name. The speaker said, "It's been a long journey for you. You've endured pain and tribulations." The speaker wiped his brow with a handkerchief, and the cloth, maybe because it was new, stuck to his forehead. Then a young girl named Rachel, with drooping eyelids and a melancholic smile, walked to the microphone and sang the national anthem rather beautifully. I was surprised that the Mexican gentleman to my right seemed to know the words to the song. When the ceremony was over, people were taking pictures. In the car, certificate in hand, I wished I had eaten lunch before coming. I hadn't driven further than 2 miles on I-84 when I saw the flashing lights of a police cruiser behind me. The cop was an elderly man with a thin mustache. When he asked for my license and registration, I picked up the US flag and the certificate and showed them to him. "Officer, I've just become a citizen. Only 10 minutes ago, I was rushing home to tell my wife." "Did you also get your license today?" "No, sir, I have been driving. No, I didn't get it today." "Then I won't be needing these. Your license and registration, please." The ticket he wrote was for $165. I thought he had behaved fairly and hadn't questioned the lie about my having a wife. But I was also suspicious that I had been punished for having become a citizen. As I proceeded to my house, driving under the speed limit now, I thought of Jennifer with gratitude. She had taken me to the DMV in Harlem in her old blue Volvo. I had been living in the United States for maybe 2 or 3 months by then. I drove her car for the test. The man who was the examiner turned out to be a Pakistani. I was afraid he was going to fail me. As I followed his instructions, "Please change lane, turn left, park on the right," etc., the thought came that I should get on friendly terms with him. I tried to make small talk. "Where are you from in Pakistan, Mr. Alvi?" I'm going on a bit, I'm sorry. "Do not talk," he said, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Please drive." When the test was over, he said that I had made one mistake, but I had successfully passed the test. I said adab to him. We shook hands. Jennifer said she was quite sure, even when she had picked me up that morning, that I was going to get the license. Then she laughed and said, "I became certain when I saw that you were going to be judged by your brother." I have one more paragraph or two, is that all right? That far-off autumn day came back to me in the car when I was given the ticket after the citizenship ceremony, more than 2 decades ago. Might have been a day in early October. To celebrate the fact that I now had a license, we had gone for lunch to an Indian restaurant on Amsterdam Avenue. I was talking in Hindi to the Punjabi woman who was the owner, and Jennifer joked that after I had had my fill of white women, I would return to India to live there and enter an arranged marriage. She imitated a head wobble and began to laugh loudly. She shut her eyes and her mouth formed a rictus. Her face had turned red. I had no idea where this sudden bitterness was coming from. Her behavior was unusual, but it probably made me think that this was the real Jennifer. It is possible that that was the moment when I began to move away. So Jennifer, I don't have an Indian wife, and actually I'm a citizen now. This is not to say that you were wrong and I was right, but simply that nothing turns out the way we imagine. It certainly hasn't for me, but thank you for taking me to the DMV.
It is, yeah, it is. Okay, so Amitava, let me start with you, taking off from that, because what happens in the book is, as AK, moves to the US, and this is a period about 30 years ago, sort of mirroring when you moved. And I know you get all of these questions. You
Say so.
deliberately chose to write this not as a memoir, but you talk about it as an in-between sort of book. But just to pick up from this piece about Jennifer, AK in a way discovers a lot about himself and how he's going to relate to this new environment, which suddenly makes him feel like an imposter, like he doesn't belong, like this is not going to be his country. It's a very far cry from this moment that you've read about, right? And he discovers himself through some of these relationships, through some of these women. Can you talk a little bit about that? And there's a lot of sex in the book, as I mentioned yesterday. You can start with that too.
Well, the book, I should, especially because I see Vasundhara from Aleph sitting there, I should tell you that the book here was published as The Lovers. Because Immigrant Montana, David Davidar said, who knows Montana here, boss? You know, The Lovers. So I'm speaking to a field of lovers. Yeah, you know, I think this is the sort of little hinge I was thinking about. When you are applying, when you meet the person at the border, the person asks you who you are, what you do. You are in some ways constructing an identity for yourself. And I think there's something similar that happens when you are falling in love or you meet someone. You're telling them who you are, what your interests are. Even the most reductive Cupid thing that on OkCupid has something about who you are, right? Even if it is 3 words. Like name, sex, more sex. You know what I'm saying? Whatever. Acha. So I was thinking that what would it mean for a young man to go to America and hear, as I did, Dr. Ruth, who is a sex expert, on the radio, talking about these things. And then think about revealing himself and learning more about himself. In fact, not just learning more about himself, but actually reinventing himself in love. Because I think that's what immigrants also do. They reinvent themselves. They find new identities when they go abroad.
Sure. And we'll come back to this. You have a very interesting quote about how when people are, you're looking at that, you look at that dark immigrant in the long line at JFK, you look at him and think that he wants your job and not that he just wants to get laid. So I'm going to come back to this. It's interesting. I think both of you also resist this, the sort of labeling that it's very easy to slot, whether as writers, but also for your characters. And Nikesh, in your case, I want to talk about a little bit about how, yes, it's about fate, destiny, like you said, cancer, coming to terms with some very, very stark topics, but it's also about relationships and finding your way, or your main characters. You do have chapters from different voices, so we get to put together this composite. It's a very different experience for Mukesh, for Rakesh, and Neha. Can we talk a little bit about that for them as a generational dilemma?
Yeah, so just to kind of give a bit more context to that, part 1 starts with Mukesh arriving in the UK from Kenya in the mid-60s. Parts 2 and 3 are in the present day, and part 4 skips back in time to the 80s. And what I wanted the book to do was to basically have that intergenerational conversation about immigration and racism. That is a thing that is very, very present for children of the diaspora in the UK with my dad, because it's always been like a source of tension between us. Whenever I would talk to my dad about racism, I'd come home from school and I'd go, oh, everyone at school says I stink of curry and they call me this word and that word. My dad would just go, this is Mickey Mouse racism. Because my dad nearly died in the 60s. He was standing at a bus stop and some members of the National Front attacked him, and one of them broke a glass bottle over his head and he nearly bled to death, but he was saved by his friends who ran off when the National Front members approached, but then did come back for him, like most cowards should. But that's another story for another day. So whenever I would have these conversations with my dad, we'd kind of get stuck in this sort of binary where it kind of had to be one thing and it could never be the other thing. And I think there is a case to say that, while for all intents and purposes, the rights have improved for people from different backgrounds or from diverse backgrounds in the UK. It hasn't necessarily, people haven't necessarily done the work to change the hearts and minds. And a story that I think really sort of cements this, and it's in the book as well, the book takes something from my real life and my family's life. In 1968, my uncle tried to buy a house up north in the UK, and he was refused. The company said they had a policy to not sell houses to coloured people. And my uncle said in 1968 that, did you know this is now illegal? Because the Race Relations Act had just come in. And my uncle was the first person to have ever brought a case of racial discrimination under the 1968 Race Relations Act. And he didn't win the case, but it was quite a landmark case. And in 2017, we've been talking about this case for years, and that was going to be the original version of this book, was going to be around that case, but it kind of went off on another journey. But we were talking about all of this stuff, and obviously with things like Brexit and the rise of far-right hate groups in the UK, things are pretty bad. But in 2017, he and I were discussing this case of this landlord who, in 2017, refused to rent properties to South Asians because he said they always make their properties stink of curry. And my uncle said, this is the same battle I was fighting nearly 50 years ago, and it tells a tale that while the laws have changed, people's hearts and minds haven't. And that's pretty much what I wanted to do with the book.
Yeah. No, and it comes across really very powerfully. I think the other point is that Mukesh, obviously the personal journeys, he's still really caught up in losing his wife, and it's a very tragic story there. But when he looks at his kids, he also seems to worry a lot for them, right? They're very outspoken. It sounds like he would prefer them to be quieter. And I think Neha, who's the twin sister of Rakesh, who's a fascinating character, at one point she creates a ruckus on a bus, and she's like, nobody likes the loud immigrant. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because she's also a very strong character you've got.
Yeah, Neha, I think is...
Tell them about how we are wearing her.
Yeah, that's Neha.
This is Neha. Neha, I think there was criticism of in the past of my work never having very well-rounded female characters, and I took that, and as most writers should do when they receive criticism, not get defensive and maybe look at your work and try and do better. And I've been thinking a lot recently about the depiction of South Asian women in popular culture, and you look at things like The Big Sick, where you have all these South Asian women in that film who are constantly the butt of the joke, and then, spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't seen the film, all of their headshots get set fire to and presented as a jar of ashes to a white girl, and stuff like that kind of representation weighs heavily on me, I think, and I wanted to do better, and I wanted Neha to be an interesting, complex character who wasn't very likable, and she was actually for me, the heart of the book and the most fun to write, and also the most difficult to write, because A, I wanted to get her right, but B, the more I wrote her, the more I wanted to do her justice. And we're working on a TV show version of the book, which is really exciting. I'm developing it with the BBC, and everyone has sort of said she's the main character of this, and so the TV version will have her front and center, which is really exciting.
Yeah. And it's an incredible character. We'll come to a little bit about Neha, but Amitava, to bring you in, who would you say is the heart and soul of this book? And AK's journey, as he's trying to find himself, place himself in this context through his relationships, again, romantic, but also there's a professor, and you've talked about basing these on, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
I was born in a town in Bihar, in a small town in Bihar called Ara, and just a couple of hours away is a village near Gaya where a man was born a few years before the partition. A Muslim man. His father was a landlord. He was killed. The father was killed while the son was sleeping next to him. The partition comes. He treks across the country. And this story is told by John Berger in a little short story. This man comes to the US then, in real life. So I'm talking about a real person. This man comes to the US, goes to Princeton, gets a fellowship to Africa to work in Tunisia, gets involved in the Algerian struggle. He's a friend of the Palestinians. In the 70s, he is arrested for conspiring to kidnap Kissinger to protest the Vietnam War, along with Christian brothers. So he was, and when he dies, as a, people like Edward Said, Noam Chomsky, Howard Zinn dedicated their books to him. He's not very well known. His name was Iqbal Ahmed. When he died, Kofi Annan delivered the funeral speech, etc. So I wanted to place him. The idea of a radical cosmopolitanism in an era of shrinking national identities. What would a person like that, someone who doesn't belong to a narrow origin, but actually in some ways belongs to all peoples of the world? And so for me, that was the starting point. And in the back of my mind, the idea of my narrator, Kailash, as a young man, being inspired by this figure, certainly made me think that that was the love affair, in a way. The love you feel for your mentor and how they guide you and how they represent a certain kind of idealism, which you in your own flawed self can never see but aspire to. That was the idea. So does that answer? Yeah.
It does. And you chose to write this, as we said, not as a memoir, not as a, it's an in-between sort of fiction, non-fiction. Obviously, you do also reference that yourself.
Right.
What about the story itself, the aesthetic of the story? Why did you choose this form?
I was tired of, I didn't want it to be a nice little domestic fiction, spiked is the wrong word, pickled with nostalgia. A little olive of nostalgia in a little drink. Instead, I wanted it to be a novel should give you a sense of what it means to be alive at that moment. Right now, some of you are checking your Facebook status updates, you're taking pictures, you have an eye on something else, you might be getting a message, you might be reading something else, taking a newspaper. We live fragmented lives. We are assaulted by all sorts of things. How do you write a novel that reflects this experience? So in my novel, the form I have taken is not that of a dull realism, but instead of something that is intercut with newspaper headlines, a little snippets. I have presented a few images that I have taken, for example, from the village that this man I was just telling you about, Iqbal Ahmed, lived in. Monkeys, stuff like that. I mean, I think that mixture of forms also reflects the idea of a person being a mixture of cultures.
And then you have this ongoing dialogue where he's defending himself to a hypothetical judge as a young man. You have the passages intercut with that.
Whenever I'm speeding on the highway in America, which I'm always doing, there is always this conversation going on in my head that when the cop stops me, what will I say? It's always there. Like, I pass something and I think I'll use that as an excuse. A car passes by me in speed and I say, sir, that guy was going so fast, I thought maybe I was going below the speed limit. I say, these stories keep going through my head. And then I thought, why don't I replace that cop with the idea of a white judge who asks, who the hell are you to be in this country? Because that was not right now. I might right now feel a little out of place in America. But when I had gone, I felt like any time they're going to take away they're going to cancel my visa. Like, I would be an imposter because who the hell was I? I wasn't doing that great in my studies either. So I was like, whoa. So that feeling of guilt or imposter syndrome, not belonging, so that's why I had this dialogue going on all the time.
Interesting. And Nikesh, in the case of the twins, now let's talk a little bit. Rakesh and Neha have a very interesting relationship because at the core you can tell that they're very close, but it's like any siblings, I suppose. Neha seems to think he's a bit of an imposter and he's selling out. Through his comedy, the way he talks about, I guess, a little bit about color and so on. But at the end of the day, I mean, do you feel, and maybe this is something to ask you both as well as writers, do you feel that there's this pressure to be representative all the time? I mean, because you're seen not just as, say, Nikesh and Amitava, you're also seen as, Indian writers of English or writers of color, and, in a way he's kind of rebelling against that and then seems to come around to understanding that he has to place himself somewhere in that context.
Yeah, I feel like with his section, because his section is narrated by five people he comes into contact with, because I wanted to kind of do this meta thing about the life of the stand-up comedian, where so much of their validation comes externally, and so I wanted to and also that, you know, stand-ups don't really give much of themselves in conversation other than the sort of the genesis of the joke, the building of the joke, the tagging on of the joke, bringing it back to the first joke. And I wanted to kind of go, well, imagine that in either a romantic situation or a situation where you're trying to have a serious conversation with your dad. What would that look like? What would that look like from the person trying to have that conversation? I thought it would be less interesting to kind of get into Rakesh's head. But that thing about representation is interesting because obviously, given my work with books like The Good Immigrant and all of the subsequent projects that have spun out of it, it's something that I kind of think about a lot. But I always think that sort of thing about representation is always extra to the work that I want to be doing, which is writing. And I think there is this sort of pressure to constantly wear the badge of honor of being a writer of color, but you know, I'd much rather just be a writer. You know, Nick Hornby never has to think about what it's like being a white middle class writer. He just is a writer, and you know, I'd love to get to that point, but at the same time, this isn't the cultural landscape that we're in the UK, and I kind of have to represent. I have to do that work. It sort of really winds me up when people describe me as writer and diversity activist, because I'm like, diversity activist is a useless thing, because asking for diversity and better inclusion isn't that big a deal. And also, I've met real activists. I'm too much of a coward to ever call myself an activist.
No, thank you. And let me ask you a little bit about Neha now. As this character, maybe just setting the stage for the audience. She's someone who wants nothing to do with the family. She doesn't want to talk to anyone else. She's really good at what she does, which is this interesting and complicated job, which maybe you can talk us through. But then she discovers that she has this, is it a spoiler to say what she has as a condition? Because the plot kind of takes off from there. She doesn't have too much time, and she decides that she wants to trace the family history for a very specific reason.
Yeah, so Neha is I'm going to say a hardware engineer. What I did was ask my cousin who does a job, I have no idea what it is, to send me his job description, and I cut and paste the job description into the novel, and I still don't understand what any of it means. But I wanted to basically spend some time exploring static and how static can kind of take your brain off in lots of different directions. I think British writers of colour don't often get to write about the interior journeys of their characters. They often have to take a walk where there's a sari billowing in the wind, and I didn't want to do that. And also I wanted her to. I think there's something interesting about isolation, and there's some, her reason for isolating herself from the rest of the world is obviously parallels another character in the book, the maternal grandmother, who is doing something similar. But I think there's something you kind of get more out of her kind of dealing with the fact that she has terminal cancer from not having her interact with the world, and so it's more like, when it's just between her and her laptop screen, how do the demons manifest?
Yeah, and sort of trying to hack her way into making sense of it, right? It's very beautifully done. Can we have a show of hands for questions? Because then we can break for. Yes, there we go. Okay, let's start getting the mics across. And while we do that, you don't have to run. That's okay. That's really nice of you, though. I'll ask Amitava a question while you get the mics to the folks. Keep your hands up. Do you feel this pressure, Amitava, to be a representative of your culture, mixed multiple cultures, anything beyond?
I should give a short answer so that people don't have to hold up their hands for too long. But
yes, we can start with. Yeah.
Do I feel responsible? How many? Can I ask you guys another question to maybe have people? How many of you are there people here who work for embassies or grant visas or something? Acha nahi, then I'm safe. I'll say this. So when I was young and applying for a visa, I have to say, I would experience a degree of humiliation that maybe if I was older, I would have been more mellow about. But there I felt scarred by it. So at that time, everything I would write, I think I saw Tanvi somewhere. You've heard me recite this part before. I would write things like this. The visa officer says, "Did you, the first time you went there, intend to come back?" wait a minute, I'll say. Did you intend to come back? Did you get a visa when you first went to the moon? Fuck the moon. Tell me about Vietnam. Just how precise were your plans there, you asshole? So you know what I'm saying. I would write such things. So I was being representative in the sense that I was representing my certain sense of angry identity of, blah, blah, blah. But now I'm like, no. Explore the shame. You know what I'm saying? That's what I do now. It's like I'm hardcore about it. Again, referring to Olive, David R. called me and said, can you write a book about your hometown? And I'm from Patna. And I thought people would hate me. But let me start with the rats that carried away my mother's dentures. You know what I'm saying? And the police commissioner said, rats, we have many problems with rats. Rats are drinking all the confiscated liquor. So shame, but also a certain perverse pride in our guile, in our inventiveness. So that's where I'm at,
Thank you. Okay. Let's start taking these questions.
So both of you have written books on, stories of immigrants and things of those sorts. How much does marketing govern what you are writing? Because these books, of course, have to sell in India as well. So, and India, the stand-up comedy scene is just picking up. So then how much does, your brand manager say, oh, you should rather write about, stand-up comedy, making it more relevant to the Indian audiences who would read this book and things of those sorts? Or does it, come to you very naturally, like, this is what's, concerning my country right now, so I should write about this or something of that sort?
Nikesh is a total sellout. He'll tell you how he does it. I don't care about it, and therefore I don't have any customers.
I just learned that I need a brand manager.
Please hold your hands up, whoever wants to be brand manager for it.
I can only write the books that I can write, and I'm only interested in like 3 or 4 things, and I think, my books will tend to be about those things, and my second novel, which is all about social media, was just because I was obsessed with the idea of social media and how we grieve online, and this book is a book that I've been trying to write for 20 years, and actually my most successful book, The Good Immigrant. When I first thought of it, my previous agent, I think, was like, don't do this. But it's gone on to be the most successful thing I've done, and it's spawned an American book as well. And I think part of that is because there are people from immigrant backgrounds who in the UK and the US, and they see what's happening politically, and they see what's happening on the streets, and people keep talking over them, and people keep talking for them, and they don't have any voice. And I wanted to do a project that gives them a voice, and I imagine I imagine here that can kind of feel like quite a distance. So I mean, I guess my rubbish answer is I don't really think about it. I just sort of write about what I'm interested in, and sadly, I'm only interested in like 3 or 4 things.
We should also mention this incredible endorsement that Amitava got from Barack. Do you call it Barack now? From the former president.
Barry. We are on Barry.
No, that was something. How did that?
The other big B.
I don't know how it happened, but it was great.
How did it feel?
Let me share that, because nothing like this happens. It was my, when you talk about the blood moon, or what is it called, the eclipse? Supermoon. That was my supermoon eclipse. Like, whoa! I got a note. Barack Obama has mentioned your book as among his favorite books of 2018. And I was like, I looked, it was the day before or after Christmas, and my mother-in-law was in the dining room, and I thought, see, you thought your daughter had made a mistake? No.
I think you deserve to get to do the most famous Barack Obama thing and drop your microphone.
And it helped with your Amazon reviews too?
Yes, it did.
There you go. Okay, some more questions.
This question is for both of you, Nikesh and Amit. I've been through the same road as both of you, but the question is about the flag. And you talked about how a policeman or a judge, that fear at the back. But I'm just going to ask you, how did the flag of the country you now reside in change in your mind when you saw it the first time in your life? And then when you went through the visa process or the immigration process, and what you see, what comes to your mind when you now look at the flag? It just gives, it's changed like a full cycle for me, but it'll be good to hear your experience.
Nikesh was, yeah.
Yeah, I was born in... The immigrant gods are not happy. I was born in the UK. I think, there's always a joke in the UK that white people always go, so where are you from? No, where are you really from? No, where are you really, really from? No, where are you really, really, really from? No, where are your parents from? No, you're not white, so what's up with that? And the thing is, like, my journey is kind of strange, and my dad is from Kenya, my mum was born in Aden. Neither of them really sort of have much connection to India, other than their parents were here. My dad's parents were born in Kenya as well, and I was born in the UK, and I didn't really feel particularly a way about being British until the 2012 Olympics, when that opening ceremony, which was a great opening ceremony directed by Danny Boyle, but it was the first time that I'd seen my city, London, like represented properly for all its like foibles and for all its multiculturalism. And I thought, above everything else, I'm a Londoner. And then I moved out of London because it's very expensive. But the thing that I've kind of had to come to terms with in the last 2 or 3 years is I'm British, and what is happening in Britain at the moment is horrific and terrifying. But my God, I want to fight for my right to be British, because, it's taken me a long time to kind of come to that in myself. And when you see what's happening, like about 3 weeks ago or a month ago, I was on a train. I was coming home from London to Bristol, or it's from Oxford to Bristol. I was doing the most British thing you could be doing. I was seeing a theatre play to review on Radio 4, which is a very British thing to do. And a guy came up to me and he said, "Where did you get your money from?" And I was eating a chocolate, and I just thought, "Oh, where'd you get your chocolate from?" I was like, "Oh, there's a shop over there." White guy, by the way. And he goes, "No, where'd you get your money from?" I was like, "What do you mean?" He said, "I haven't got any money, and you've got money." And I was like, "I don't understand what you mean." And he was like, "Where were you born?" I was like, "Well, I was born in Britain." He said, "That doesn't make you British, does it? I could take your passport away just like that." And then we had a bit of a discussion back and forth, but that moment really, really chilled me, because it was such a normalized and he wasn't angry. He was quite matter of fact about things, but it was just, in that moment he just made me feel like I didn't belong. And stuff like that is happening so much in the UK at the moment because of things like Brexit, and it just emboldens me to think that I need to keep fighting and doing projects like the Good Immigrant, and writing about difference, and writing about being honest about these things, and centering people's voices. And yeah, I've run out of steam on that, but
No, that
you know
was-
what I'm trying to say.
that's- yeah.
I went on a bit, sorry.
No, that was good. And Amitava, do you want to?
Boss, ever since Barack Obama said he read my book, I was ready to be American. I was like, yo, boss, I belong. I am there. Because also, Narendra Modi wouldn't have read my books. In fact, he wouldn't have read any books. In fact, so that's not going to work. No, but to be serious for a second. I think, especially because there are young people here, what I would want to say is, the Japanese writer Haruki Murakami was at MIT when there was the poison gas was spread in the subway in Tokyo and people died. And the way in which he wanted to connect with that tragedy was that he came back and talked, went through very difficult conversations with a lot of people. And I find that you don't belong to a country, you actually enter into a process of discovering your country through conversation with real people. Don't shout slogans or wave flags. Instead, engage with real people and their real histories. And thereby, you are linked to people rather than a place. You know?
I really enjoyed your talk. This is for both of you. I just spent a year in the UK, and I was asked the most inane questions. For example, oh, you speak such good English. Where did you learn it and how did you learn it? When I used to respond quite sincerely, by the end of it, I was like, oh, this little thing called colonialism. So my question to you is, you've mentioned some of the weird questions and also terrifying questions and conversations you've had. Do you feel this related to representation question as well, do you feel the onus is on you to educate people around you, or with the technology and the internet today, people have the means to do it and it's not your responsibility anymore?
Do you want to take this one? No, you start, man. He's giving himself time to think. Throwing me in. You reply impulsively. I'll just say something either considered or hilarious, depending on what you said.
This is like Indians fighting who will going to pay after the meal. नहीं, छोड़ दो. नहीं, देखो मेरे से बुरा कोई नहीं होगा. नहीं, मैं देखो. Okay, fine. No, boss, I don't worry about those things. Instead, I'm like, I take delight in the fact, for example, that a guy who is over 90 years old, living in Mumbai, writes every week a sex column in Mumbai Mirror. You know, where he answers, what's his name? Dr. Vatsa. Matter of opinion, but yeah. I love the fact that he's so acerbic. And I love the fact that he mocks what I think are youthful people for their massive ignorance, which I entirely empathize with because I was equally ignorant. Perhaps I still am. You know what I'm saying? So what I'm trying to say is, the idea is not, let me correct it, but instead the whole drama of ignorance and half knowledge and stumbling knowledge. वो चीज़ ना, the comedy of life. वो चीज़. That's what one should. Otherwise, you are always going to be correcting people. So, that art is not about that. We are not poster writers. We are prose writers. वो मैं थोड़ा सा मित्रों उस तरह का मैंने जुमला दे दिया.
Yeah, I have to agree. I have no interest in like educating people in the UK anymore. I've done these books and I thought a long time about who The Good Immigrant was for and who The One Who Wrote Destiny is for, and I feel like they're both for young people of colour in the UK who haven't had something that holds up a mirror to them in a long time, like I did with Hanif Qureshi and with Zadie Smith and so on and so forth. And like it's almost skipped a generation. I'm not necessarily interested in racist white people or white liberals reading my book and reading either of those books and going, yeah, I really understand. Where are your parents from? No, where they really. And so there's an amazing writer called Rennie Edo-Lodge who is speaking at this festival, and definitely go and check her out. She's talking with Hurry and an amazing poet called Keo Chingonyi, both really dear friends of mine. And she said this amazing thing because when she did this book called Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race, and she and I did lots and lots of gigs around The Good Immigrant and that book, and you'd invariably be asked by lots of well-meaning white liberals, how can I be an ally to you? And her answer was always amazing. She would basically go, I have no interest in you being an ally to me. That's not helpful. I don't know where you hold power and influence. What is important is that you establish where you hold power and influence and try and do things within those circles, and I will establish where I hold power and influence, and I will do things in those circles. And I think that's for me, a really, really important way to look at it. And it just means that I don't necessarily think it's my responsibility to do like the grassroots day-to-day educating of ignorant people. All I can do is write and hope that that writing inspires young people of colour in the UK to kind of feel like their stories are valid and that they are seen.
Good question. We also do have a session with Nikesh and Sharmila Sen on Sunday, not white, which is why we're saving some comments for there, but please feel free to ask these questions as well.
I anticipate it'll be chaired brilliantly as well.
Thanks, Nikesh. Okay, where is the mic? One second. So there's a young person, I think we go with young, then there's one there.
This dude in the pink shirt has had his hand up since the start.
There's a mic, is there a mic near him? So two, let's take two together and you guys can answer. Can you get a mic too? We have about like 10 minutes, so we can take a few more. He'll go first and then you. We'll take them together and then you guys can answer.
Okay, thank you very much. And I came to this event because I read The Good Immigrant last year, and now I'm living in Jaipur, and I was very surprised and interested to see that you were talking today. And what my question is, since I read the book as well because I'm half Chinese, half British, and I was born in the UK, so I was interested in some of the different stories, and I received it as a Christmas present. So, but my question is, have you followed to what extent have you followed the debates about multiculturalism in India? And I was interested in whether you had noticed any kind of differences and similarities with the debates about multiculturalism in the UK and the US. Just very brief comment on that. Now, since I'm living here, sometimes I've joked, I'm from India, and people have generally said, no, you're not from India. And I was like, how do you know? And more than once it's been, well, you're not brown. So, yeah, I was just interested in your thoughts on that.
Thank you. Okay, and let's take yours.
Yeah, my question's a bit different. I don't know, I'm standing up, but I'll sit. But my question for you two is...
Stand up, speak with your chest.
Okay, fine. My question for you two is about the questions you guys raise in your books about what kind of immigrant we have to be. I, like Nikesh, am first generation American. Amitava, you're the same, I mean, you're an immigrant. But my question is, we are confronted with this question of what kind of immigrant we want to be, right? I think this is brought up in The Good Immigrant, but you have different types of immigrants. Or in comedy, you have Russell Peters and Hassan Minhaj and Nikesh Kumar, who all have very different sort of angles to being South Asian. Some of them which I find offensive, others I find more relatable. My question is, bringing it up in your book, what's the process you think of to bring up those different angles of what kind of immigrant we need to be, or what society wants us to be?
Good question. And can I get any women with questions? I'll be the last one because we have to, yes. Ma'am, can we get a mic to the lady in the first, and then you start answering the questions.
The lady in the Gap sweatshirt, near the Gap.
What?
More Gap.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So there's two questions, sorry. And maybe we'll, do you want to take them all together? I'm going to confuse you terribly. Okay.
Okay. I'm so happy that you have dealt with this in a very light-hearted, humorous way, this problem. Can we look at it from a real serious point of view? No. America itself is a land of immigrants. None of the people who are there today were there earlier. They have come from all over the world and settled there as immigrants. Why have they changed their attitude today and looked down upon immigrants today? Number one. And like you come from UK. These Britishers came to India as traders and ultimately became our rulers and looted our country and went back.
Okay.
It's high time they make amends to us. Why do they look down upon us when we go to them as immigrants?
Good question. Sorry. And last, the Gap sweatshirt, and then you knock yourselves out.
We'll deal with it, don't worry.
Hi. So Amitava, you mentioned that when Murakami, he went to wherever he went, Japan, and he interviewed real people. Don't you think that if you're saying that those people who've suffered or who are poor and they're the real people, you're creating a distance and you're saying that their lives are something that you need to like make a spectacle out of? So, I mean, isn't that defeating the entire purpose.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
I'm going to tie up all those questions and answer, and then you do the same, okay?
Okay.
What kind of an immigrant am I? I've seen that the soft emotion of nostalgia is turned into the hard emotion of fundamentalism among diasporic Indians. And I want to produce always a critique of that. You know, Indians going abroad invent themselves as the real Indians. They are more orthodox, more retrogressive, acutely regressive, especially in gender politics outside. And so it is to in some ways distance myself from that I want to produce myself as an immigrant. Now, whether it is in America or is in India, I really think I have benefited because I feel increasingly alienated from this country. Not simply because it chose bad people as the leaders, but because of just distance, living abroad, you know. I always feel that I learn more when I go to various places and talk to people for my journalistic stories. You, my dear friend, were very presumptuous in saying that this is making a spectacle. I didn't think Murakami was making a spectacle when he wrote about them, but instead you're trying to produce a complex, nuanced portrait of the people you're talking to and the person you are who is doing the talking. Cool? आप समझ रही हैं बात? So that, you know, for example, after the riots, I went to Ahmedabad and, you know, talked to people. I noticed, for example, that weddings were being held in the riot camps. And I wanted to understand why was that being done. You don't have a home, but you're very eager to get your daughter married off. It was a tragic story why they were doing that. Am I making a spectacle of it? I'm actually investigating a condition, a human condition that needs to be broadcast as broadly as possible and needs to be discussed. I'll stop my rant there. Chalo, use.
No, because my life is consumed by Brexit. Everything is Brexit, and that's pretty much all I have the capacity to follow politically. So I haven't engaged with the conversations here, I'm afraid. Yes, the English, the British need to pay back.
Payback time. Okay, moving ahead to number 3.
I think the great thing for me about The Good Immigrant was giving lots of people a platform to tell stories from their perspective in their own voices, and obviously you ended up with lots of writers who agreed with each other, disagreed with each other, came at the same issue from different angles, and that complexity sort of, I think, allowed for like some nuance in the conversations around these things, because so often if you're someone from an immigrant background or you're from a marginalized community and you say one thing, people take that as gospel, that everyone thinks that thing, and I think that's a real problem. And so for me, the power of that book was having a diversity of opinions from a diversity of voices.
Thank you. I think on that note, we're going to, give a big round of applause to Amitava and Nikesh. Thank you so much. And we do want to thank you for being an incredible audience. Great questions. There will be signings. I run out of steam. Thank you.
And thank you to you.
Yeah, thank you.
दैनिक भास्कर राजस्थान का सबसे बड़ा अखबार। दैनिक भास्कर, एक स्मार्ट सोच। दैनिक भास्कर